Hi there, and welcome to The Wrap, your weekly summary of news you really need to know with me, Verashni Pillay, and the rest of the Explain.co.za team. Today, we're looking at water issues in South Africa, what came out of the budget speech, Zuma's latest antics, and the vaccine rollout. So, let's dive right in. Today's take is on saving water to avoid a future crisis. Now, you probably know that much of South Africa's water infrastructure is badly mismanaged or in need of upgrading, and the country is a water scarce one generally. Three recent events should be a warning to us that the situation drastically needs attention. Firstly, large parts of Joburg will experience planned water cuts this weekend as Rand Water, which services the city's water system, repairs faulty valves underground. Secondly, the National Department of Human Settlements, Water and Sanitation will take our water infrastructure in Mfuleni in Gauteng, will take over rather the water infrastructure in Mfuleni in Gauteng, following a report by the South African Human Rights Commission that showed that this municipality was ruining the nearby Vaal River, which obviously supplies a lot of the rest of the country and the region. The report found that the raw sewage flowing from the broken down waterworks is a health risk to people and the environment, no duh. And lastly, one of the most interesting pieces of news is that residents of Koster and Swartrugens, which is a town in the northwest, were allowed to take control of their town's waterworks. Now, this was according to a News 24 report, and it's really fascinating. The Northwest High Court ruled that the municipalities concerned had breached their constitutional duty to provide water to the town and its residents. That's because the water purifying works are in states of disrepair and are mismanaged, according to the court. Residents were able to get things back on track within days. This ruling sets an important precedent for citizens wanting to take back control and get things moving. But what is government doing about all of this? Late last year, Water and Sanitation Minister Lindiwe Sisulu launched her master plan. It revealed solutions, but also the real extent of the problem. As Mail and Guardian's acting editor Sipho Kings, who's also an environmental journalism expert, said, South Africa's infrastructure is just not sufficient for our growing population. Kings has written that the country has nobly spent enough money to supply 95% of the population with water, but because of all the aforementioned problems with mismanagement and corruption and lack of expertise, a third of the infrastructure doesn't actually work. Add to this a vast country where water must be transported from dams across thousands of kilometers to big cities, and a warming climate causing unforeseen droughts, and we've got a problem. Now, as I've said, government is acutely aware of the myriad problems. Besides the master plan, 12 large infrastructure projects were gazetted last year, but now authorities need to tackle the problems of mismanagement, corruption, and a skills shortage, or they face being embarrassed when citizens like those in Koster and Swartrugens successfully take matters into their own hands. But look, saving water should also become a huge priority for people like us, living in big cities or elsewhere. We are in a water scarce country. Let's start acting like it. Moving on to the big story. This one was all about the budget that happened yesterday. Now, with a huge debt burden to manage, a pandemic to be curbed, and rating agencies breathing down his neck, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni cut government spending during his budget this week while sparing the middle class a bit of pain. It was a really good balancing act. Mboweni is also holding the line against public sector unions, refusing to give in on a wage freeze which will ease the pressure on the country's balance sheet, as the Financial Mail noted. So here's how the budget affects you more directly. Number one, the good news: your personal tax increases won't increase, thanks to you. Last year, government was able to rake in 40 billion rand more in tax revenue than expected, so it doesn't have to shake us down more for more taxes now. And if you own a company, you'll get some relief by paying slightly less tax. And if you're a smoker or a drinker, as usual, you'll be paying more for your quote-unquote sins. Other big developments include 9 billion rand allocated to the vaccine rollout program, with the private sector funding the rest. This is important because there was a lot of panic earlier on about how we were going to fund this and raise taxes, and we've managed to fund it without raising taxes, which is really good news. But here's the rub. With the twin issues of high government debt and money needed for vaccines, Mboweni has had to cut some government programs. On the one hand, this is necessary as government spending is one of the major causes affecting our credit ratings and our constrained finances long term. But on the other hand, these kind of cuts hurt the poorest. Social grants will effectively decrease from April as payments won't keep up with inflation. The special distress grant ends that same month. That was the one that was done for COVID. Mboweni said we just cannot afford more. Now, what's getting affected? It's things like higher education, land reform programs, and funding to non-profit organizations. This is in addition to the grants that are getting affected. It's all really bad news for the poor. One solution is spending one's way out of a crisis with stimulus packages, as the US is doing, but we just don't have the cash reserves to do that. At least we're on the right track. Moving on to your briefs. Nelson Mandela was infamous for his Madiba shirt. Thabo Mbeki and Kgalema Motlanthe were strictly suit men. Cyril Ramaphosa has been known to go crazy with a golf shirt for his morning walks, but that's about as interesting as his wardrobe gets. Enter Jacob Zuma, who had Twitter in stitches this week over the shirt he just can't stop wearing. From meeting with Julius Malema for that tea party a few weeks ago to his chat with Police Minister Bheki Cele last week, and more, the former president appears to recycle the same black and gold number for every meeting. It gives a whole new meaning to the term airing one's dirty laundry in public. The shirts were on display, or rather shirt, in a series of photographs posted by his daughter Duduzile Zuma Sambudla, who, as we report this week, has become her father's spin doctor, spreading all kinds of conspiracy theories about why Zuma is in trouble with the law. She's becoming a bit like the Ivanka to Donald Trump. Speaking of Zuma, the ANC's top 6 officials are next in line to meet with him, or rather give him special treatment to convince him to, not break the law and attend the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. That meeting has not happened yet, but you can be sure that when it does, the Zuma shirt will be in attendance. Next, fancy a trip to, wait for it, Gqeberha? The decolonizing project is still underway, albeit slowly. This week, we saw a new name given to Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. It is now called Gqeberha. Gqeberha is the isiXhosa name for the Barkens River that runs through the Windy City and was the first name used for this area and for the oldest township in Port Elizabeth, which later became known as Valma, IOL reports. The larger metro is still called Nelson Mandela Bay. Now let's talk again about how to pronounce it. The first 3 letters is just a click, with the tip of your tongue at the front of your palate. And the rest is pronounced Berha, with a soft h, similar to how that letter is pronounced in Afrikaans, but a little less pronounced. Now back to the name and how it changed. It did not happen overnight. It's actually taken 2 years. Arts and Culture Minister Natim Tshetwa, who announced the name change this week, said that it is unacceptable that the black population is a majority in South Africa, but remains a cultural minority as colonial symbols dominate the landscape. Other name changes are on the cards. Obviously, many folks are up in arms over this name change because of the difficulty in pronouncing it. But come on, if you can pronounce the Game of Thrones lead character Daenerys Targaryen, surely you can give Gqeberha a shot. Moving on, sounds of life on Mars. With the landing of NASA's latest Mars probe, Perseverance, this week, we heard the first ever audio from the red planet. The eerie sounds of winds blowing across the barren surface of Mars, or rather barren as far as we know. The mission is to look for signs of ancient life on Mars. This was the most detailed footage of Mars yet, showing every nail-biting second of Perseverance's descent to the reddish-brown soil. It's not the first time a spacecraft has landed on Mars, but it's the first time we've watched it happen real time. If you haven't seen the footage, head over to NASA's website to witness history. You can also try your hand at decoding the hidden messages in the Perseverance parachute left by NASA engineers for fun. As CNN reported, one was the Jet Propulsion Lab motto, "Dare mighty things." Moving on back to the city of Joburg. If you live in Joburg or in Mpumalanga, you might have gotten a whiff of a terrible smell in the past few days. That's the smell of sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. It also smells a bit like poo. Twitter account Gauteng Weather issued a warning about poor air quality in Gauteng on Wednesday, followed by a tweet saying that the Department of Environmental Affairs will be investigating the root cause of the stench and sharing comment from multiple environmental scientists. Sasol is believed to be the culprit, as stated over years of reporting by Mail and Guardian. The energy and chemical company's plant in Mpumalanga was said to be emitting elevated levels of sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide into the air, according to environmental experts cited in the South African. But Business Maverick, which is the business section of the Daily Maverick, reports that the investigation is still ongoing by both the department and Sasol itself. Cecil claims its emission profile is compliant and operations are stable, adding that abnormal atmospheric conditions are compounding the effects of the industrial sulfur emissions in the Mpumalanga, Highveld and Gauteng regions. We don't know how long it will be in the air, but at least you have a mask to protect you from the stench. Another reason to keep it on. Next up, more people enter the labour force but don't have a job. Earlier this week on Tuesday, Stats South Africa published the unemployment statistics for the last quarter of 2020. That's from October to December of last year. What it showed was that the official unemployment rate has increased to 32.5% from 30.1% in the previous quarter. Now, a quick reminder, the official unemployment rate refers to employment within the labour force. This group is made up of people between the ages of 15 and 64 who could potentially have a job and are actively looking for a job. People in school, those in tertiary education, homemakers, and those that are unable to work due to ill health are not included. So what this means is that the number of people in the labour force who could or should be employed but are not is at least 7 million people. At the same time, at least 1 million people entered the labour force during this period, mainly young people who dropped out of school last year or finished university but could not find employment. This is what brought the figure to 7 million. On the expanded definition of employment, it's looking even worse. It includes people who are of employable age but are not actively looking for a job. Including this group, there's an increased figure of 2.6%. Stats SA reports that at least 330,000 people did get a job during these 3 months, but job losses outweighed the number of jobs gained. We have a special report on our site about the unemployment crisis and how we can fix it. So if you're interested in more on that, check it out on our website. On to some international sports news. Golfer Tiger Woods, who is now 45, is said to be recovering after a pretty severe car crash this week. The New York Times reports that Woods lost control of the SUV he was driving on a twisting and winding stretch in Los Angeles before hitting the pavement and a tree and rolling several times. He sustained leg injuries that required him to undergo hours of surgery. That's a big ouch. There's speculation about whether Woods, who has won 15 major championships, will bounce back after this major injury. Woods has undergone other procedures in the past, including a spinal operation, which has hobbled his performance recently. Now, doctors say it can take anything between a few months to over a year for Woods' lower leg bones to grow together, and even longer for him to fully recover. But there's no telling yet if he will be able to play golf again. Moving on, Australia versus Facebook. For years, journalism has suffered as Facebook and Google gobbled up advertising revenue, especially digitally. Now Australia is fighting back and wants to pass a bill that forces Facebook and Google to pay media publishers for the right to include their news content on social media platforms and search engines. Australian lawmakers say they want to curb the tech giants' power over digital advertising, a major cause of news publishers' declining revenues for the past 2 decades. As South African journalist Toby Shopchak says in Business Day, while Facebook and Google clocked up a combined $267 billion in revenue last year, the media industry that relied on advertising has been decimated. Let's remember, this is the same news industry that is the ones who check news and check facts, and this is directly linked to the rise of fake and misinformation in our society and the threat to democracies as elections have been thrown by misinformation. So Facebook should have, been amenable to this request, but instead they responded by banning news content for all of Australia. What was that about freedom of speech again, Mark Zuckerberg? It was a really petty move, and in the process they managed to block a whole bunch of websites that actually offered important information from the Australian government, and hilariously Facebook's own page in the country. Google, however, has said it will negotiate deals with news publishers in the country. Now look, as South Africans, we may be enemies with Australia when it comes to sport, but when it comes to press freedom, we're with Australia on this one. On to your vaccine update. We're happy to report that just 1 week into South Africa's COVID-19 vaccine program, things have gone pretty smoothly, despite all the doomsday comments we've been hearing about how we have never going to get vaccines. Turns out we really did. Health workers, some of which have been skeptical about the vaccine, are now flocking to hospitals to get their shot, showing their confidence in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is currently being administered according to SABC. It is not yet known exactly how many healthcare workers have been vaccinated to date, but since Sunday, over 10,000 health workers did get their shots, SABC reported. This is the first phase of the vaccine rollout, and so far, the government says it's satisfied with the way things are going. Plus, the second batch of the J&J consignment is expected to land in the country on Saturday, News 24 reports. The other big news of the week was the class of 2020, getting their matric results. After a really terrible year for this particular generation, the results are out. Matrics from government schools at a pass rate of 76.2%. It's a 5% drop from the previous year, but given the effects of the pandemic on education, it's much better than even basic education Andy Mochecha's predictions. Independent schools did even better with a pass rate of 98%. Considering the stresses of online learning plus the psychological impact of the pandemic, all the matrics did amazingly well. But you're probably wondering, why do independent schools, which include private and hybrid schools, always fare better? While they do tend to observe slightly different curriculums, IAB versus CAPS, this doesn't make as much of a difference as many think. Both are accredited by the same organization, Umalusi. The real difference, as one education site notes, is that government schools are typically very stressed in terms of resources and surrounded by socioeconomic circumstances such as high poverty, which hinders students from committing to their education. But there are many excellent public schools too. Regardless, government or independent, we salute our matric class of 2020 and their teachers and wish them everything of the best for the future. And in our last story for today, South African artists fight back. COVID-19 has devastated the arts sector and South Africa's artists are fighting back. Earlier this month, 2,000 artists signed a petition calling for Arts and Culture Minister Nathi Mthethwa to be fired after he tweeted that the South African theatre scene was alive and well, something that creative industry leaders said showed how out of touch he was with reality. As Daily Maverick reports, artists from across the creative industries gathered this week at Toyota Stellenbosch University of Woordfees to discuss the ways the pandemic has hit the industry. They said the industry was badly funded even before COVID-19. Cancelled performances and thus no pay means artists are now even worse off. In an editorial, Maverick Citizen editor Mark Haywood called for more funding for the sector in the 2021 budget announced on Wednesday. That didn't happen, but Haywood's plea is worth repeating here. He says, undoubtedly, poverty and inequality require that we fund our material infrastructure for the delivery of rights. But it is equally important we direct resources at those people and occupations that tend to our spiritual infrastructure, the people whose work inculcates democratic values. These are our poets, our dancers, our actors, and the venues and support systems needed to make it possible for them to work. That's it from us at The Wrap, a product for Explainer Koza. Simple news summaries for busy people. Remember to share the love. Tell your friends to sign up for the updates at explainer.koza/subscribe. Till next time, it's goodbye from me and the rest of the team.